a fully paid first-class ticket, a window seat, and the anticipation of a smooth cross-country flight. For one woman, it was the perfect start to her journey. But for the passenger sitting next to her, the color of her skin was an unacceptable disruption to his luxury experience. He didn't just want her moved, he demanded it, creating a scene that silenced the entire cabin. He was loud, arrogant, and certain he would get his way. What he didn't know was that the young black woman he was trying to eject from her seat wasn't just another passenger. She was the one flying the plane. The hum of the Boeing 737's auxiliary power unit was a familiar lullaby to First Officer Jasmine Brooks. It was the sound of home, a symphony of imminent departure that never failed to thrill her. Today, however, she was flying as a passenger, deadheading back to her home base in Atlanta after a grueling week of simulator training in Seattle. Tucked into Seat 2A in the first-class cabin of Horizon Air Flight 202, she relished the rare opportunity to be on the other side of the cockpit door. Her uniform was neatly packed in her carry-on. Today, she was dressed in comfortable but chic travel attire: tailored navy trousers, a silk white blouse, and a stylish blazer. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and a pair of simple pearl studs adorned her ears. At 29, she had achieved her childhood dream, a dream that had required immense sacrifice, discipline, and an unwavering passion for the skies. She was one of the youngest first officers at Horizon Air, and one of only a handful of black female pilots in the entire company. She was proud of her accomplishments, but wore them with quiet humility. Today, she was just Jasmine, a passenger looking forward to a few hours of peace with a book and a view of the clouds from the other side. She had just settled in, her novel open on her lap, when a shadow fell over her. A man in his late 50s, his face a mask of sour disapproval, stood in the aisle, his ticket clutched in a beefy hand. He was dressed in an expensive, albeit slightly rumpled suit, a flashy silver watch adorning his wrist. His thinning blonde hair was slicked back, and his jowly face was already flushed with irritation. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low growl that immediately set Jasmine on edge. It wasn't the words, but the tone, a blend of arrogance and impatience that she had unfortunately become all too familiar with in her line of work, though usually from a greater distance. Jasmine looked up, offering a polite, neutral smile. "Yes?" The man, whose name she would soon learn was Mr. Thompson, gestured vaguely toward her seat with his ticket. "I believe you're in the wrong seat." Jasmine's smile faltered slightly. She glanced at her own boarding pass, resting on the armrest, then back at him. "I don't think so. I'm in 2A, and he announced as if it were a royal decree. "I am in 2B, and I paid a significant amount of money for this seat, with the expectation of a certain level of clientele." His eyes flickered over her, a dismissive, appraising glance that made her skin crawl. The implication was as clear as it was ugly. Jasmine felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. She had faced this kind of subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, prejudice before. But here, in the supposed sanctuary of the first-class cabin, it felt particularly jarring. She took a slow, deliberate breath, refusing to let his bigotry spoil her journey. "I assure you, I've also paid for my ticket," she replied, her voice calm and even, a stark contrast to his barely concealed hostility. "Perhaps you should check your own boarding pass again." A senior flight attendant, a graceful woman named Laura, with a warm smile and years of experience in her eyes, noticed the tense exchange and glided over. "Is there a problem here, sir?" she asked, her voice the epitome of professional courtesy. Mr. Thompson turned his glare on Laura. "Yes, there's a problem. This person," he gestured toward Jasmine again, the word person dripping with disdain, "is in my seat." Laura's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sure we can sort this out. May I see your boarding pass, sir?" He thrust the ticket at her. Laura examined it and then looked at Jasmine's. "Sir, your seat is 2B, right here, and this passenger is in 2A. Everything seems to be in order." "In order?" he scoffed, his voice rising, attracting the attention of other passengers who were now trying and failing to appear as if they weren't listening. "I don't think so. I am a Platinum Elite member with this airline, and I will not be crammed next to her." The "here" hung in the air, thick and venomous. He didn't say the word black, but he didn't need to. The meaning was crystal clear to everyone in the cabin. The undercurrent of racism was now a raging torrent, and the hushed whispers of the other passengers were a testament to the shared discomfort. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest, a furious drumbeat of anger and humiliation. She had worked so hard, had overcome so many obstacles to be here, and now this man was trying to reduce her to nothing more than the color of her skin. She felt the eyes of the other passengers on her, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and perhaps, in some, a shared prejudice. She wanted to shrink into her seat, to disappear. But then, a different feeling began to surface, pushing past the hurt and the shame. It was a feeling she knew well, a feeling that had fueled her journey from a working-class girl with an impossible dream to a confident pilot in control of a multi-million-dollar aircraft. It was defiance. She met Mr. Thompson's gaze, her own eyes now cold and hard as steel. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice quiet but firm, carrying a weight of authority that seemed to momentarily surprise him. "This is my seat, and I suggest you take yours before you cause any further disturbance." For a moment, Mr. Thompson seemed taken aback by her sudden assertiveness. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, as if he couldn't quite believe she had dared to challenge him. But his shock quickly morphed back into anger, his face turning a shade of puce that clashed horribly with his expensive suit. "We'll see about that," he snarled, turning back to the flight attendant. "I want to speak to your superior, now. I will not be spoken to like that by someone who clearly doesn't belong here." Laura, the flight attendant, maintained her professional composure, but a flicker of anger flashed in her eyes. "Sir, I am the lead flight attendant on this flight, and I must ask you to lower your voice. You are disturbing the other passengers." "I don't care who I'm disturbing," he bellowed, his voice now echoing through the quiet cabin. "I want her moved, and I want it done now, or I'll have your job. Do you have any idea who I am?" Jasmine closed her eyes for a brief second, a silent prayer for patience on her lips. She had a feeling this was only the beginning. The man was a storm cloud, gathering fury, and she was sitting directly in his path. But she wouldn't be moved. Not by his threats, not by his bigotry. She had earned her place in this world, and she would be damned if she let him, or anyone else, take it away from her. The symphony of the engines was now a distant hum, drowned out by the cacophony of a battle she had not sought, but one she was fully prepared to fight and win. The standoff in the aisle of Flight 202 had reached a tense impasse. Mr. Thompson, red-faced and quivering with indignation, remained rooted to the spot, his arms crossed tightly over his chest like a petulant child. He had made his demand, and in his mind, it was not a request, but an order to be followed without question. The other first-class passengers were now openly staring, their quiet conversations abandoned, their pre-flight champagne forgotten. The cabin, once a haven of calm anticipation, was now charged with palpable tension. Laura, the lead flight attendant, was a seasoned professional. She had dealt with her fair share of difficult passengers over the years, from drunken celebrities to entitled executives. But Mr. Thompson was in a class of his own. His blatant racism, delivered with such unshakable conviction, was something she hadn't encountered in a long time. It was ugly, it was vile, and it was a direct violation of the airline's code of conduct. "Sir," she began again, her voice a little firmer this time, "I must insist that you take your seat. We are preparing for departure, and the aisles need to be clear. I will take my seat when she," he jabbed a finger in Jasmine's direction, "is removed from this cabin. I don't care where you put her. Put her in the back with the rest of them. But she is not sitting next to me." The rest of them was another verbal jab, another thinly veiled slur that made Jasmine's blood run cold. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She hated being the center of attention, especially for something so demeaning. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him what she thought of his bigotry, but she knew that would only escalate the situation, would only give him more ammunition. So she remained silent, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the page of her book, though the words were now just a blur. Another flight attendant, a young man named Ryan, came to Laura's side, his expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Is everything all right, Laura?" he whispered. "No, Ryan, it's not," she murmured back, her eyes still locked on Mr. Thompson. "This gentleman is refusing to take his seat." "What's the problem?" Ryan asked, though he had a pretty good idea. "The problem," Mr. Thompson interjected, having overheard them, "is that I am a paying customer, and I have a right to a comfortable and pleasant journey, and that is not possible with this arrangement." Jasmine finally looked up, her patience wearing thin. "What arrangement are you referring to?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The fact that I am a black woman sitting in a seat that I paid for?" Mr. Thompson sneered. "I'm not going to get into a debate with you. You know exactly what I mean. People like you should be grateful you're even on this plane, let alone in first class." The sheer audacity of his statement left Jasmine speechless. She stared at him, her mind reeling. How could someone be so filled with hate, so utterly convinced of their own superiority? It was like something out of a history book, a relic of a bygone era that she had hoped was fading into the past. The other passengers were now murmuring amongst themselves. A woman in the seat across the aisle, a well-dressed woman in her 60s, leaned forward. "For goodness sake, man, just sit down," she said, her voice laced with exasperation. "You're making a fool of yourself." Mr. Thompson shot her a withering glare. "You mind your own business," he snapped. "It is my business when you're holding up the entire flight and making everyone uncomfortable with your disgusting prejudice," she retorted, her cheeks flushed with anger. A man in the row behind them chimed in. "Yeah, buddy, leave her alone. She's not bothering anyone." The tide of public opinion was turning against Mr. Thompson. But he seemed oblivious, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He was a man accustomed to getting his own way, and he was not about to back down now. He saw this as a matter of principle, a defense of his perceived rights and privileges. "I am not moving until she is," he declared, his voice rising to a near shout. "I demand to see the captain or the gate supervisor, someone with some real authority." Laura knew that she had to de-escalate the situation, but she was running out of options. She couldn't physically force him into his seat, and he was clearly not responding to reason. The departure time was ticking closer, and the captain would soon be calling to see what the holdup was. "Sir, the captain is preparing for takeoff and cannot be disturbed," she explained, trying to sound as patient as possible. I am the authority in this cabin, and I am telling you that you need to take your seat. If you continue to refuse, I will have to consider you a disruptive passenger, and that could have serious consequences." "Are you threatening me?" he sneered, a smug look on his face. "Go ahead, I'd love to see you try. I'll have you fired by the time we land. I have powerful friends, you know, very powerful friends." Jasmine had had enough. She slowly closed her book, a sense of weary resignation washing over her. This was not how she had envisioned her flight starting. She had just wanted a few hours of peace, a chance to recharge before her next shift. But it seemed that peace was a luxury she would not be afforded today. She turned to Laura, her expression calm and collected, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside her. "It's all right, Laura," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'll move." Laura looked at her, her eyes wide with surprise. "Jasmine, you don't have to do that. You have every right to be here." "I know," Jasmine replied, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "But I also have a right to a peaceful flight, and it's clear I'm not going to get one sitting here, Mr." Thompson let out a triumphant snort. "See, she knows her place." Jasmine ignored him, her gaze fixed on Laura. "Is there another seat available in first class?" Laura hesitated, a look of deep conflict on her face. She hated the idea of giving in to this man's bigotry. It went against everything she believed in. But she also knew that a prolonged confrontation would only delay the flight further and cause more distress to the other passengers. And Jasmine, the victim in all of this, was offering a way out. "Yes," she said finally, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "There is one other seat, 4F. It's a middle seat, I'm afraid." Jasmine nodded. "That's fine, I'll take it." She stood up, gathering her belongings with a quiet dignity that seemed to further infuriate Mr. Thompson. He watched her every move, a smug, victorious smirk plastered on his face. He had won, he had gotten his way. The black woman had been put in her place. As Jasmine started to move toward the aisle, the woman who had defended her earlier reached out and touched her arm. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, my dear," she said, her eyes full of genuine sympathy. "His behavior is absolutely appalling." Jasmine gave her a grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "I appreciate that." She squeezed past Mr. Thompson, who made no effort to move out of her way. He simply stood there, basking in the glow of his perceived victory. As she walked down the aisle toward her new seat, she could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her back. She kept her head held high, refusing to show them the hurt and humiliation that was churning inside her. She found seat 4F, a cramped middle seat between two burly businessmen who were already engrossed in their laptops. She stowed her bag in the overhead compartment and settled into the seat, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. She was a pilot, a commander of the skies, and yet she had just been forced to move from her rightful seat because a racist bully couldn't stand the sight of her. The irony was not lost on her. But as she sat there, listening to the cabin crew making their final preparations for departure, a new feeling began to take root. It was a slow-burning anger, a righteous fury that she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. She had been accommodating, she had been gracious, she had tried to be the bigger person, but it had gotten her nowhere. It had only emboldened the bully and validated his prejudice. She thought about her journey to become a pilot, the countless hours of studying, the grueling exams, the relentless pressure to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. She had fought tooth and nail for her place in the cockpit, and she would not let this man, or anyone like him, diminish her accomplishments. The engines of the 737 began to roar to life, the powerful vibrations resonating through the cabin. To most people, it was just noise, but to Jasmine, it was a call to action. It was the sound of power, of control, of authority. And in that moment, she made a decision. This was not over. Mr. Thompson may have won the battle, but she was about to win the war. He wanted to see someone with real authority? Fine, he would get his wish, and he would regret it for the rest of his miserable life. As the Boeing 737 pushed back from the gate at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, a tense silence had fallen over the first-class cabin. Mr. Thompson, now comfortably settled in his aisle seat, had a smug look of satisfaction on his face. He had won. He had successfully removed the unsuitable passenger from his vicinity, and now had the two seats, 2A and 2B, to himself. He stretched his legs out into the space Jasmine had vacated, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He ordered a glass of whiskey from a tight-lipped Ryan, the flight attendant, and began to peruse the in-flight magazine as if nothing had happened. The other passengers, however, had not forgotten. They exchanged uneasy glances, their hushed conversations filled with condemnation for the man in 2B. The woman in the seat across the aisle, Mrs. Carter, looked particularly incensed. She had witnessed the entire exchange and was appalled by the blatant racism and the airline's apparent capitulation. Jasmine, now wedged in the middle seat in row 4, tried to make herself as small as possible. She felt a deep sense of shame and anger, not just at Mr. Thompson, but at herself for backing down. She had let him win. She had allowed his bigotry to dictate her actions. But what else could she have done? A prolonged confrontation would have only delayed the flight and made her the continued focus of unwanted attention. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the world around her. But the image of Mr. Thompson's sneering face was burned into her mind. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made to get to where she was. The years of hard work, the financial struggles, the constant need to prove herself in a world that often seemed determined to hold her back. And for what? To be treated like a second-class citizen on her own airline? As the plane taxied toward the runway, the fasten seatbelt sign pinged on. Laura, the lead flight attendant, began her pre-flight safety demonstration, her voice calm and professional, betraying none of the inner turmoil she was feeling. She was furious with herself for not handling the situation better. She should have stood up for Jasmine more forcefully, should have made it clear that Mr. Thompson's behavior was unacceptable and would not be tolerated. But in the heat of the moment, with the pressure of an on-time departure, she had made a split-second decision to de-escalate, and now she was regretting it. The flight took off without a hitch, the powerful engines lifting the massive aircraft into the sky with a graceful surge of power. As the plane climbed through the clouds, the seatbelt sign was switched off, and the cabin crew began their in-flight service. Laura made her way to the front of the cabin, her expression a mask of professional neutrality. She stopped at Mr. Thompson's seat. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice polite but cool. "Yes," he said, without looking up from his magazine. "Another whiskey, and make it a double." Laura nodded curtly and turned to go, but then she hesitated. She couldn't let it go. She had to say something. "Sir," she began, her voice low and firm, "I just want you to know that your behavior earlier was completely unacceptable. We do not tolerate any form of discrimination on this airline, and your treatment of the other passenger was a clear violation of our policy, Mr." Thompson finally lowered his magazine, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Are you lecturing me, young lady?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I suggest you just get my drink and mind your own business, unless you want me to have a word with your CEO. I have him on speed dial, you know." Laura felt a surge of anger, but held it in check. "I'm just informing you of our policy, sir," she said, her voice even. "And I will be filing a full report of this incident upon our arrival in Atlanta." Mr. Thompson laughed, a short, harsh sound that grated on the nerves. "You do that," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm sure it will be given all the attention it deserves." He turned back to his magazine, a clear signal that the conversation was over. Laura stood there for a moment, her fists clenched at her sides. She felt utterly powerless. This man was a bully, a racist, and he was getting away with it. She retreated to the galley, her heart heavy with frustration. Ryan was there, preparing drinks for the other passengers. He looked at her with concern. "You okay, Laura?" She shook her head. "No, Ryan, I'm not. I can't believe we let him get away with that." "What could we do?" Ryan said, shrugging helplessly. "He's a Platinum Elite member. You know how the company fawns over those guys." "I don't care what his status is," Laura said, her voice shaking with anger. "What he did was wrong, and we just stood by and let it happen." Just then, the phone from the cockpit buzzed. Laura picked it up. "Cabin, Laura speaking." "Laura, it's Captain Harris," said the voice on the other end. "I've just had a call from dispatch. They've been monitoring the onboard passenger manifest and noticed a last-minute seat change for First Officer Brooks. They wanted to know what was going on." Laura's heart sank. She had been hoping to deal with this on her own, without involving the captain. But now it was out of her hands. "Yes, Captain," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We had a situation." "A situation?" the captain repeated, his voice sharp with concern. "What kind of situation?" Laura took a deep breath and explained what had happened, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and shame. She told him about Mr. Thompson's racist remarks, his refusal to sit next to Jasmine, and her own decision to move Jasmine to another seat to avoid further conflict. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When the captain finally spoke, his voice was cold and hard as ice. "I see," he said. "And where is First Officer Brooks now?" "She's in 4F, Captain," Laura replied. "And the passenger who caused the disturbance?" "He's in 2B. Another long silence. Then, "Laura, I want you to bring First Officer Brooks to the cockpit immediately." "Yes, Captain," Laura said, a glimmer of hope igniting within her. Captain Harris was known for his no-nonsense attitude and his fierce loyalty to his crew. He was not a man who would tolerate this kind of behavior. "And Laura," the captain added, his voice low and menacing, "tell the passenger in 2B that I will be having a word with him personally and that he should enjoy his whiskey because it will be his last." Laura hung up the phone, a small, triumphant smile on her face. The tide was turning. The storm that Mr. Thompson had unleashed was about to turn back on him with the full force of a Category 5 hurricane. She walked back into the cabin, her step a little lighter, her shoulders a little straighter. She went straight to Jasmine's seat. "Jasmine," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "The captain wants to see you." Jasmine looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "The captain? Why?" "He knows what happened," Laura explained. "He wants to talk to you." Jasmine hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She unbuckled her seatbelt and followed Laura to the front of the plane. As they passed Mr. Thompson's seat, he looked up, a curious expression on his face. He watched them as they disappeared behind the cockpit door, a faint sense of unease beginning to creep into his whiskey-fueled haze. He had a feeling his perfect flight was about to hit some unexpected turbulence, and for the first time that day, he was not looking forward to it. The cockpit of the Boeing 737 was a world away from the tension and drama of the passenger cabin. Here, all was calm and controlled, a symphony of flickering lights, digital displays, and the quiet hum of sophisticated machinery. Captain Harris, a man with graying hair and a commanding presence, sat in the left-hand seat, his eyes fixed on the endless expanse of blue sky ahead. He was a veteran pilot with over 30 years of experience flying for Horizon Air. He had seen it all. Or so he thought. When Laura escorted Jasmine into the cockpit, he turned in his seat, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. He looked at Jasmine, a young woman he had mentored and admired for her skill and professionalism, and saw the flicker of hurt and humiliation in her eyes. "Jasmine," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I am so sorry. I just heard what happened. There is no excuse for that kind of behavior on my aircraft." Jasmine gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate that." "I've already spoken to dispatch," he continued, his voice hardening. "They are arranging for Mr. Thompson to be met by security upon our arrival in Atlanta. His Platinum Elite status has been revoked, effective immediately, and he will be banned from flying with Horizon Air for life." Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected such a swift and decisive response. A wave of relief washed over her, so potent it almost made her knees buckle. "Wow," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Captain. That's more than I ever expected." "It's the least I can do," he said, his eyes flashing with anger. "That man is a disgrace, and he will not get away with it. Not on my watch." He then turned to Laura. "Laura, I want you to go back to the cabin and inform Mr. Thompson that I will be coming out to speak with him shortly. And I want you to offer First Officer Brooks her original seat back, 2A, and make sure she gets a bottle of our best champagne on the house." Laura nodded, a wide smile spreading across her face. "With pleasure, Captain." She and Jasmine left the cockpit, leaving Captain Harris to his thoughts. He stared out at the clouds for a moment, his mind racing. He was not just angry at Mr. Thompson. He was angry at a world where a talented and dedicated pilot like Jasmine could be subjected to such vile prejudice. He was angry at a system that sometimes seemed to reward entitlement and bigotry, and he was determined to make a stand, to send a clear message that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. Back in the cabin, Laura approached Mr. Thompson's seat, her heart pounding with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice loud and clear, attracting the attention of the surrounding passengers. "Captain Harris will be out to speak with you shortly." Mr. Thompson looked up from his magazine, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "About time," he grumbled. "I was beginning to think he was hiding in there." "And," Laura continued, a triumphant glint in her eye, "we will be needing you to move back to your assigned seat, 2B." Mr. Thompson frowned. "What are you talking about? I'm in 2B. "No, sir," Laura said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You are currently occupying seats 2A and 2B. Seat 2A belongs to First Officer Brooks, and she will be returning to it now." She gestured to Jasmine, who was standing behind her, her expression a mixture of nervousness and newfound confidence. Mr. Thompson stared at Jasmine, then back at Laura, a look of utter disbelief on his face. "You can't be serious," he sputtered. "I am not moving, and she is not sitting here." "I think you'll find that she is," said a deep, authoritative voice from behind them. Everyone turned to see Captain Harris standing in the aisle, his uniform immaculate, his face a mask of cold fury. He was an imposing figure, and his presence immediately commanded the attention of the entire cabin. He walked slowly toward Mr. Thompson, his eyes locked on the man's face. "Mr. Thompson," he began, his voice low and dangerous. "I am Captain Harris, and this is my aircraft. And on my aircraft, we have a zero-tolerance policy for racism, bigotry, and any form of harassment." Mr. Thompson seemed to shrink in his seat, his bravado rapidly evaporating in the face of the captain's authority. "Now, I was just," he stammered, but the captain cut him off. "I know exactly what you were," Captain Harris said, his voice like a whip. "You were a bully and a racist. You verbally abused a member of my crew and a fellow passenger, and you caused a disturbance that delayed our departure and caused distress to everyone on this flight." He paused, letting his words sink in. The cabin was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. "Now," he continued, "you have two choices. You can either apologize to First Officer Brooks, move back to your assigned seat, and spend the rest of this flight in silence. Or you can be restrained, arrested upon our arrival in Atlanta, and face criminal charges for interfering with a flight crew." Mr. Thompson's face had turned a pasty white. He looked from the captain to Jasmine, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. But he still didn't seem to grasp the full extent of his miscalculation. "First Officer Brooks?" he repeated, a confused frown on his face. "What are you talking about? She's just a passenger." Captain Harris allowed himself a small, cold smile. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Thompson," he said. He then turned to Jasmine. "First Officer Brooks, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself properly." Jasmine stepped forward, her head held high, her eyes shining with a newfound strength. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her official airline ID. She held it up for Mr. Thompson to see, the gold pilot wings glinting in the cabin light. "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating with a quiet power that filled the entire cabin, "is Jasmine Brooks. And I'm not just a passenger on this flight. I'm your first officer. I'm one of the pilots flying this plane." The revelation hit the cabin like a thunderclap. A collective gasp went through the passengers, followed by a ripple of murmurs and exclamation. "Mr." Thompson stared at the ID, then at Jasmine's face, his own face a comical mask of shock, horror, and utter humiliation. The woman he had tried to have thrown out of first class, the woman he had dismissed as not belonging, was not just a passenger. She was in command. She held his life and the lives of everyone on board in her hands. The color drained from his face. He looked as if he was about to be sick. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just sat there, frozen in his seat, his world crumbling around him. The woman across the aisle, Mrs. Carter, began to clap. Slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm. Soon others joined in, a spontaneous round of applause that filled the cabin. A tribute to the young pilot who had faced down bigotry with grace and dignity. Jasmine felt a blush creep up her cheeks. But this time, it was not from shame. It was from pride. She had not just won a battle against one man's prejudice. She had won a victory for every woman, every person of color who had ever been told they didn't belong. She gave a small, grateful nod to the other passengers, then turned her attention back to Mr. Thompson. He was still staring at her, his eyes filled with a dawning terror. He had messed with the wrong woman. He had picked a fight with a pilot, and he was about to experience the full, terrifying force of her descent. The karma he had so casually invited was about to land, and it was going to be a very, very hard landing indeed. The applause in the first-class cabin slowly died down, replaced by a thick, heavy silence that was almost as loud. Mr. Thompson, who just moments before had been the picture of arrogant self-assurance, now looked like a man who had seen a ghost. His face was a ghastly shade of pale, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost comical to behold. The pilot, the woman he had belittled and insulted, was one of the pilots. The realization seemed to have short-circuited his brain. Captain Harris, his arms crossed over his chest, looked down at the cowering man with an expression of utter contempt. "Well, Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice cold and sharp as a shard of ice, "what's it to be? Apology and silence, or handcuffs and a criminal record?" Mr. Thompson seemed to have lost the ability to speak. He just stared at Jasmine, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. Jasmine, for her part, felt a strange sense of detachment. She was no longer angry. She was no longer hurt. She just felt a kind of weary pity for this small, pathetic man who had built his life on a foundation of hate and prejudice. Finally, Mr. Thompson managed to find his voice, though it was a mere shadow of its former booming arrogance. I'm sorry," he stammered, his eyes darting around the cabin, avoiding Jasmine's gaze. I didn't know. You didn't know she was a pilot," Captain Harris shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And that would have made a difference. Your behavior would have been acceptable if she was just a passenger." Mr. Thompson flinched as if he had been struck. "No, I mean, Just what, Mr. Thompson?" the captain pressed, his voice relentless. "Just thought you could treat another human being like dirt because of the color of her skin? Is that it?" Mr. Thompson couldn't answer. He just hung his head in shame, the weight of his own bigotry finally crashing down on him. "I didn't think so," Captain Harris said, his voice laced with disgust. He then turned to Jasmine. "First Officer Brooks, your seat is waiting for you." Jasmine nodded, and with a quiet dignity, moved past the now cowed Mr. Thompson and settled back into her original seat, 2A, the window seat. Her rightful place. Laura, the lead flight attendant, appeared at her side a moment later, a bottle of Dom Perignon and a crystal flute in her hand. "Your champagne, First Officer," she said, her voice filled with a warmth and respect that had been absent before. "Thank you, Laura," Jasmine said, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. As Laura popped the cork with a festive pop, the other passengers broke into another, quieter round of applause. It was a moment of shared victory, a celebration of justice served. Captain Harris gave Mr. Thompson one last withering glare. "I suggest you spend the rest of this flight contemplating the consequences of your actions, Mr. Thompson," he said, "because I assure you, they will be severe." He then turned and walked back to the cockpit, his mission accomplished. The cabin slowly returned to a semblance of normality, but the atmosphere was forever changed. The initial tension had been replaced by a sense of quiet satisfaction, of a wrong righted Mr. Thompson, for his part, seemed to have shrunk into his seat. He was a shadow of his former self, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and self-loathing. He didn't order any more whiskey. He didn't read his magazine. He just sat there, staring blankly ahead, a man adrift in a sea of his own making. The rest of the flight passed in relative peace. Jasmine sipped her champagne and read her book, but she found it hard to concentrate. Her mind kept replaying the events of the past few hours. She had stood up for herself. She had been vindicated, but the experience had left a bitter taste in her mouth. It was a stark reminder that no matter how high she flew, there would always be those who would try to bring her down. When the plane finally began its descent into Atlanta, a sense of dread began to creep back into Jasmine's heart. She knew that this was not over. Mr. Thompson's humiliation on the flight was just the beginning. The real karma was yet to come, yet. As the plane taxied to the gate at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Captain Harris made his final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have now arrived in Atlanta. On behalf of Horizon Air and your entire flight crew, I'd like to thank you for flying with us today. We hope to see you again soon." He paused for a moment, then added, his voice firm and deliberate, "And a special thank you to First Officer Jasmine Brooks, who, in addition to her duties as a pilot, also gave us all a valuable lesson in grace, dignity, and courage." A fresh wave of applause rippled through the cabin. Jasmine felt her cheeks flush, but this time it was with a deep sense of pride and gratitude. When the cabin door opened, 2 uniformed police officers and an airline official were waiting on the jet bridge. They boarded the plane and went straight to Mr. Thompson's seat. "Mr. Thompson," one of the officers said, his voice polite but firm, "we need you to come with us." Mr. Thompson looked up, his face a mask of resignation. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just stood up, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and allowed them to escort him off the plane. As he walked past Jasmine's seat, he chanced a glance at her. Their eyes met for a brief second. In his, she saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected. A glimmer of what looked like genuine remorse. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done. The consequences were now his to bear. Jasmine watched him go, a sense of closure washing over her. She had faced the storm and had come out the other side, stronger and more determined than ever. She had a long journey ahead of her, both in the skies and in the ongoing fight for equality and respect. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she was ready for it. She was a pilot. She was a leader. She was a force to be reckoned with. And she would never, ever let anyone make her feel small again. The sky was not her limit. It was her home. And she would defend it, and her right to be there, with every fiber of her being. The humiliation Mr. Thompson endured on Flight 202 was only the beginning of his descent. He had assumed his wealth and status made him untouchable, a belief that was about to be spectacularly and publicly shattered. The consequences of his actions rippled outward, far beyond the confines of the Boeing 737, creating a tsunami of karma that would swamp every aspect of his carefully curated life. It began the moment he was escorted off the plane at Atlanta. The airline official, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Harper, informed him in no uncertain terms that his lifetime Platinum Elite status with Horizon Air was revoked, his account was flagged, and he was permanently banned from flying with them or any of their partner airlines. For a man who prided himself on his jet-setting lifestyle, this was a significant blow. The thousands of dollars he had spent to achieve that status were now meaningless. But that was just the appetizer. The main course of his karmic feast was served up by the other passengers. Mrs. Carter, the woman who had initially defended Jasmine, was a retired journalist with a still active and widely read blog on travel and social issues. She had discreetly filmed the latter part of the confrontation on her phone, including the captain's intervention and Jasmine's powerful reveal. Within hours of landing, she had written a scathing blog post titled, "Bigotry at 30,000 feet, the day a racist bully met his match." She detailed the entire incident, her prose sharp and unforgiving. She named Mr. Thompson, described his vile behavior in excruciating detail, and embedded the video. The post went viral almost instantly. By the time Mr. Thompson was released from questioning by the airport police, who let him go with a stern warning and a hefty fine for causing a disturbance, the story was everywhere. It was on social media platforms, news outlets, and beyond. The video of his sputtering, shocked face as Jasmine flashed her pilot's badge had become a meme, a symbol of entitled bigotry getting its just desserts. His name, a name he had always associated with power and prestige, was now synonymous with racism and public humiliation. The fallout was swift and brutal. Mr. Thompson was a senior partner at a prestigious national law firm, a position he had held for over 2 decades. The firm, which prided itself on its commitment to diversity and inclusion, was horrified. Their phones rang off the hook with calls from angry clients and reporters. The firm's managing partners held an emergency meeting. They couldn't afford to be associated with such a public relations disaster. By the end of the day, Mr. Thompson was invited to take an immediate and indefinite leave of absence, a polite corporate euphemism for being fired. His photo and bio were scrubbed from the company website. His long and lucrative career was over, destroyed in a matter of hours by his own ugly prejudice. His social life, the world of exclusive clubs, charity galas, and high society gatherings that he so cherished, also imploded. He was a pariah. Invitations were rescinded. Friends stopped returning his calls. The powerful friends he had so arrogantly boasted about wanted nothing to do with him. He was toxic, a social leper. His wife, a woman who valued social standing above all else, was mortified. Their carefully constructed world of privilege and respectability had been torn to shreds. She filed for divorce within the week. Even his children, 2 grown sons who had always viewed their father with a mixture of awe and fear, were disgusted. One of them, a young lawyer trying to make his own way in the world, wrote a public letter to the editor of a major newspaper, condemning his father's actions and apologizing to Jasmine on behalf of his family. It was a final, devastating blow, a public repudiation from his own flesh and blood. And Jasmine? She became an overnight sensation, a hero, a role model. Horizon Air, eager to distance themselves from the incident and capitalize on the positive publicity, launched a major PR campaign featuring her as the face of their commitment to diversity. She was interviewed by news outlets from around the world. She was invited to speak at schools and community events. She used her newfound platform to advocate for more women and people of color in aviation, to inspire a new generation of pilots to follow their dreams, no matter the obstacles. She never saw Mr. Thompson again, but she heard through the grapevine that he had sold his lavish Atlanta penthouse and moved to a small, quiet town in the countryside, a self-imposed exile from a world that no longer wanted him. He was a broken man, a ghost of his former self, haunted by the memory of his public downfall. Jasmine, on the other hand, soared. She was promoted to captain within 2 years, one of the youngest in the airline's history. She continued to fly the cross-country route, her love for the sky undiminished. And every time she settled into the captain's seat of her Boeing 737, she would take a moment to look out at the endless expanse of blue, a quiet smile on her face. She had faced the storm, and she had not just survived. She had triumphed. She had proven that no amount of hate or prejudice could ever ground a spirit that was meant to fly. The sky was her kingdom, and she was its queen. And in her kingdom, everyone, regardless of their color, their gender, or their background, had a right to be there. It was a lesson Mr. Thompson had learned the hard way, a lesson written in the indelible ink of karma, a story that would be told and retold for years to come. A cautionary tale of a man who reached for the stars, only to be brought crashing down to earth by the very woman he tried to keep on the ground. That, my friends, is what we call a hard landing for karma. A man so inflated by his own privilege thought he could eject a woman from her rightful place, only to discover she was the one in the driver's seat of his destiny. This story is a powerful reminder that prejudice and arrogance are baggage that will eventually get you thrown off the flight of life. The best part? This isn't just a story. It's a reflection of the real-world consequences that are increasingly and rightfully meeting those who peddle hate. If you were cheering for Jasmine and believe that karma served a 5-star meal, hit that like button. Share this story to spread the message that respect is non-negotiable at any altitude. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story of real-life drama where justice takes flight.